The Pacific Ocean in 1942 was not just a battlefield of water and islands. It was a realm of air supremacy, where dominance meant survival and defeat meant oblivion. Across that endless blue expanse, Japanese pilots ruled the skies in their sleek Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters. They were fast, agile, and carried the pride of the Empire's warrior spirit into every battle. For the first 6 months of the Pacific War, Allied airmen lived under the shadow of these Japanese masters of aerial combat, unable to match their skill or machinery. From the attack on Pearl Harbor to the conquest of the Philippines and the fall of Singapore, Japanese pilots carved their legend through fire and destruction. The Zero was more than a fighter plane. It was a symbol of invincibility, an angel of death that danced through the sky with impossible grace and lethal precision. American and Allied pilots who faced the Zero called it untouchable. They were shocked by its turning ability, its climb rate, and the fearlessness of its pilots. Dogfights against the Zero often ended the same way. Allied aircraft, heavy and sluggish, were outturned, outclimbed, and outgunned in a storm of tracer fire. Every airbase across the Pacific carried whispered legends of the Japanese aces. Men like Saburo Sakai, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, and Tetsuzo Iwamoto, who dominated the air with near-superhuman skill. The Allies were desperate for an answer, something to break the stranglehold that the Zero had imposed across thousands of miles of ocean and jungle. But in the skies above Guadalcanal and New Guinea, hope was fading. Allied pilots flew outdated P-39s, P-40s, and F-4F Wildcats, none capable of challenging the Zero on equal terms. Every mission became a gamble with death. Pilots fought knowing that skill alone could not overcome the technological gap that separated them from their enemies. Then, in the laboratories and factories of America's industrial heartland, engineers were already working on a new kind of weapon. Something faster, higher, and deadlier than anything that had ever flown before. The Lockheed Corporation, under the brilliant designer Clarence Kelly Johnson, had been developing an experimental twin-engine fighter called the P-38 Lightning. It was unlike any aircraft in existence. Twin booms connected by a central nacelle, 2 turbo-supercharged Allison engines, and a top speed exceeding 400 miles per hour. The design looked futuristic, almost alien. To some, it was too strange, too complex. To others, it was the future of aerial warfare taking shape in metal and innovation. While the Pacific burned, these prototypes took flight over California test ranges, gathering data that would soon alter the balance of power in the skies forever. The Lightning was born from a simple yet revolutionary concept: that speed, altitude, and firepower could defeat maneuverability and tradition. Instead of turning tightly like a Zero, it would dive, climb, and strike with blinding velocity, using energy rather than agility as its greatest weapon. In a world that still believed in close-range dogfighting, the P-38 introduced a new philosophy: that the one who strikes first and fastest lives, while the other burns. By late 1942, the U.S. Army Air Forces were ready to test this new weapon in the deadliest proving ground on Earth: the Pacific. The 339th Fighter Squadron, stationed in New Guinea, was among the first to receive the P-38 Lightning. Pilots trained feverishly, learning to master the twin-engine beast that demanded precision and respect. Many doubted its effectiveness. Could such a heavy twin-engined machine truly survive against the agile Japanese Zero? But those doubts would soon be answered in fire and blood over the jungles of Bougainville. On November 18, 1942, a formation of P-38 Lightnings took off on their first combat mission in the Pacific Theater. The air was thick with tension, and every man knew history was waiting. Below them, the green world of the Solomon Islands shimmered under the tropical sun. Above, the endless blue held death in every direction. The Lightning pilots climbed higher and higher, their engines roaring with the deep thunder of twin turbo superchargers, propelling them toward a destiny that no one could yet foresee. Far below, Japanese patrols scanned the sky, unaware that the age of the Zero was about to end. The mission was routine, a long-range patrol to cover friendly bombers, but what happened that day would mark the beginning of a revolution in aerial warfare. As the formation approached Bougainville, radar picked up Japanese aircraft approaching from the north, a mixed group of bombers and fighters flying toward Guadalcanal. The P-38s broke formation, climbing into attack positions. The pilots felt their hearts pounding as they pushed the throttles forward. the engines screaming with raw mechanical power. It was time to test the legend of the Lightning against the myth of the Zero. When the two forces met, the sky erupted in chaos. Tracers cut through the air like fireflies from hell, and the calm Pacific horizon became a storm of death and motion. The first Zero banked sharply, turning inside the Lightning in a familiar maneuver. But the American pilot didn't follow. Instead, he climbed vertically, then dove like a hawk from above. The twin 20mm cannons and 50 caliber machine guns of the P-38 tore through the Zero's fuselage, exploding it into a flaming spiral that fell into the sea below. For the first time, American pilots realized they could strike without entering the deadly turning duels that had cost so many lives before. They could control the battle with speed and altitude, deciding when and where to fight, while the Zeros struggled helplessly to keep up. Within minutes, several Japanese aircraft were downed. The rest broke off, retreating into the clouds, their confidence shattered by a machine they had never seen before. When the Lightnings returned to base, the mechanics counted bullet holes and battle scars, but every pilot made it home alive. The era of helplessness was over. The tide had begun to turn. The news spread through the Allied ranks like wildfire. A fighter that could climb higher, fly faster, and strike harder than anything Japan possessed now ruled the skies. Japanese pilots were stunned. Their Zero, once the king of the Pacific, had met a rival that defied everything they understood about aerial combat. In Tokyo, reports of the new American aircraft caused alarm among naval commanders, who realized that their era of technological dominance was ending. But this was only the beginning. The P-38's first victory was not just tactical. It was psychological. The birth of a new doctrine that would redefine air warfare forever. The Pacific theater was about to witness an evolution. A shift from close-range duels of honor to long-range strikes of precision and power. And at the center of it all stood the P-38 Lightning, the twin-engine angel of thunder that would change the course of the war. The age of the Zero was fading, and a new empire of the air was rising. Yet deep within the Japanese ranks, one man vowed to understand this enemy machine and destroy it from the inside out. That man was Saburo Sakai, Japan's most celebrated ace. And in the next battles, he would meet the Lightning face to face. In the aftermath of the first P-38 victories, the Japanese military intelligence began compiling reports about the mysterious American twin-engine fighter that seemed unstoppable. Pilots described its lightning-fast dives, unmatched climb rates, and devastating firepower that could tear through even the most maneuverable aircraft within seconds. Among those reading these reports was Saburo Sakai, the Imperial Navy's legendary ace with more than 60 confirmed aerial victories. He had faced death countless times, survived bullet wounds to the face, and earned the respect of every man who flew beside him. But even Sakai was troubled by the new arrival in the Pacific skies. The Zero had been a perfect machine for his skill. Lightweight, responsive, and graceful in combat like a sword in his hands. Yet this new enemy, this Lightning, did not fight like the others. It refused to engage in the traditional duel of turn and counter-turn. Instead, it appeared from the sun or the clouds, struck with blinding precision, and vanished before any Japanese pilot could react. Sakai understood what this meant. The Americans were learning, they were evolving. The era of chivalric air duels was ending, replaced by a brutal new science of energy, altitude, and speed. Reports from Rabaul, Leh, and Buin described formations of these strange fighters, escorting bombers at impossible altitudes. They flew higher than any Japanese aircraft could reach, attacking from above and disappearing into the thin blue sky. Japanese engineers struggled to analyze captured fragments of wreckage, trying to understand how two engines could produce such terrifying performance. Their greatest discovery was that the Lightning used turbo superchargers, devices that allowed it to maintain power at altitudes beyond the Zero's limit. To Japanese designers used to lightweight simplicity, it was both genius and heresy. The empire had built its aerial power on speed through minimalism, light frames, thin armor, and the mastery of the pilot's skill. The Americans, however, had chosen the path of engineering power. More engines, more armor, and more firepower than anyone thought possible. The Lightning symbolized the industrial strength of a nation capable of turning science into victory. For Sakai, this was more than a technical challenge. It was a philosophical one. Could spirit and discipline still triumph against machines built by mass production and technological excess? That question haunted him as the war dragged deeper into 1943, and the skies over New Guinea became the stage for constant aerial duels. One morning in early April, Japanese scouts reported a formation of American bombers heading toward Rabaul, escorted by unknown fighters. Sakai prepared his men with calm determination. He believed that understanding the Lightning required seeing it face to face. As his Zero lifted from the coral runway, the rising sun bathed the sea in gold, and he whispered a silent prayer to his ancestors. High above the jungle-clad mountains, the contrails of American aircraft drew white scars across the sky. Sakai's squadron climbed to intercept, their engines screaming as they strained toward the enemy formation. At 20,000 feet, he saw them, silver flashes glinting in the sun, twin tails gleaming like spears of light. The P-38s were beautiful and terrifying at once, their massive engines leaving trails of thunder as they maneuvered with calculated precision. Sakai ordered his flight to break formation and attack from above, using the element of surprise to offset their technical disadvantage. But as his Zero rolled into a dive, the Lightning pilots spotted them and instantly scattered into tactical pairs. The sky exploded with gunfire. Tracer rounds crisscrossed the clouds like red lightning bolts as both sides plunged into chaos. Sakai dove behind a Lightning, its twin tails filling his gun sight. He fired a burst, but the American rolled away with impossible acceleration. The sheer power of those engines stunned him. The Lightning climbed vertically as if gravity did not exist. In seconds, it was gone, replaced by another diving from above, cannons blazing in perfect precision. The shockwave of the explosion shook Sakai's Zero as debris rained from the sky. He narrowly avoided collision, banking hard into a turn, knowing instinctively that turning battles meant death against this new enemy. Instead, he dove toward the sea, using cloud cover to escape and re-engage on his own terms. But the Lightning pilots refused to follow him downward. They stayed high, maintaining control through altitude and energy. It was a strategy that defied every instinct of traditional Japanese air combat, a war of mathematics and momentum, rather than honor and maneuver. Sakai landed safely, his fuel nearly gone, his mind racing with realization. The Americans had rewritten the laws of aerial warfare, and the Lightning was their instrument of change. Later, during the debriefing, Sakai described the encounter not as a battle, but as an education. "They fight like eagles," he told his commander. "They strike from above, and never let their prey strike back." His words spread across the Imperial Navy air units, like prophecy. Young pilots began questioning the very principles they had been taught, that agility and courage alone could win the skies. But the Empire's industrial limits made change impossible. Japan lacked the resources to build such complex machines. Their factories were already stretched thin, their supply lines collapsing under the relentless pressure of American naval blockades. Meanwhile, in America, new P-38s rolled out of Lockheed factories every week, powered by an industrial machine that seemed endless. By the summer of 1943, entire squadrons of Lightnings patrolled the skies from Guadalcanal to New Guinea, extending Allied reach deeper into enemy territory. The Japanese could no longer rely on the Zero's agility to protect their bombers. The Lightning's range and speed allowed it to escort American formations farther than any single-engine fighter in history. Japanese morale began to crack. Pilots who once believed in their invincibility now faced nightmares they couldn't outfly. The Zero was still elegant, still deadly in skilled hands, but it was now a relic of a fading doctrine. Sakai watched young pilots die against the new enemy and realized that bravery could not replace lost technology. He wrote in his diary that the war had become a contest between factories rather than warriors. The Americans had turned the sky into an assembly line of destruction. Still, Sakai refused to surrender to despair. He adapted his tactics, using teamwork and surprise to exploit the Lightning's weaknesses at low altitude. On several missions, he led ambushes at dawn, striking from behind clouds when the sun blinded the enemy. In one encounter near Wewak, his flight caught a formation of Lightnings off guard and downed two before escaping into the clouds. But these victories were fleeting, overshadowed by constant losses that drained Japan's strength day by day. Each time a Lightning appeared, it carried not just guns and bombs, but the weight of a new world that Japan could not stop. Sakai often wondered if his ancestors could see what had become of war: machines replacing honor, mass production replacing skill. The Lightning embodied America's philosophy: to overwhelm through speed, altitude, and endless supply. Japanese engineers studied captured aircraft, marveling at the craftsmanship and complexity of the turbo supercharger systems that gave the P-38 its power. They realized too late that Japan could never replicate such technology under wartime constraints. The balance had shifted irrevocably, and every pilot who took off knew it in his heart. Yet even amid despair, Japanese airmen fought with the same spirit that had defined their empire for centuries. They believed that dying with honor was better than living in defeat. For Sakai, that belief was not blind faith but duty, the final line between chaos and meaning. He continued to fly missions even after severe injuries, his right eye nearly blind, his hands scarred from burns. His legend grew among both sides, respected by enemies who recognized his unmatched courage in the face of impossible odds. But even heroes could not stop the relentless advance of technology and industry. Every new Lightning carried radar improvements, better gun sights, and refined engines that outclassed anything in Japan's arsenal. American pilots like Thomas Maguire, Richard Bong, and Charles McDonald soon became aces themselves, learning from each battle how to perfect the boom and zoom strategy. They admired Sakai's skill, but pitied his position: a master swordsman forced to duel against artillery. Each victory they achieved was not just a kill, but a message that the new age had arrived. The Lightning had proven that brains and machinery could outmatch spirit and tradition. By late 1943, the Japanese High Command faced a grim reality. The Zero could no longer guarantee air superiority anywhere in the Pacific. From Rabaul to Truk, from Bougainville to New Britain, the P-38 Lightning dominated the skies with unchallenged supremacy. Sakai survived, but many of his comrades did not. Their sacrifice became a symbol of courage trapped in a losing war. The empire that once conquered the Pacific now fought for survival, its dream of eternal expansion reduced to ashes and memory. Yet for Sakai, defeat was not humiliation. It was revelation. He understood that war evolves as men evolve. The Lightning had not only changed strategy, it had changed belief. And in its roaring engines, he heard the sound of the future: cold, mechanical, unstoppable. As 1943 closed, the Pacific belonged to the Lightning, and the world began to understand that the age of the Zero was truly over. But deep within American command, a secret mission was already forming, one that would use the Lightning in a way never before imagined. That mission would target the heart of Japan's command itself, and its success would echo across history. It would be the day the Lightning struck down the Empire's most powerful symbol. The day America hunted Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto from the sky. And when it came, the war would never be the same again. By early 1943, the Pacific War had reached a turning point, as the Japanese Empire began losing ground and air superiority across the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. The P-38 Lightning had already proven its dominance, but its most defining moment was yet to come: a mission unlike anything the world had ever seen before. Intelligence analysts at Pearl Harbor intercepted secret Japanese communications, revealing a detailed travel itinerary of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the attack on Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto was planning an inspection tour of forward bases in the Solomon Islands, completely unaware that American cryptanalysts had broken the Japanese naval code known as JN-25. The decoded message contained exact details of his flight, including departure time, route, altitude, and expected arrival, making him a marked man without realizing it. To many within American command, Yamamoto was not just an enemy, he was the architect of their humiliation on December 7, 1941. His death would be both strategic and symbolic, a blow that would shake Japanese morale and send a message that no enemy was beyond reach. The mission was given a chilling codename, Operation Vengeance, and its execution was entrusted to the pilots of the United States Army Air Force's 13th Fighter Command. The task was simple in theory, but nearly impossible in practice: intercept Yamamoto's aircraft over hundreds of miles of ocean without being detected by Japanese radar. Only one aircraft had the range, speed, and altitude capability to accomplish such an operation: the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. On April 17, 1943, 18 P-38 Lightnings were secretly prepared at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal for a mission shrouded in absolute secrecy. The chosen pilots were among the best, including Major John W. Mitchell, who would lead the formation, and Rex Barber, who would later make history that day. Their briefing was short and cold. They were told the target was of extreme importance, and that failure was not an option under any circumstance. The mission plan demanded a precise low-level flight of more than 400 miles, avoiding detection from both enemy patrols and ground observers. The pilots would navigate without radio contact using only compasses and stopwatches to maintain perfect timing with no margin for error. The target was Yamamoto's transport aircraft, a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber escorted by 6 Zero fighters flying from Rabaul to Balal airfield. If the timing failed by even a few minutes, the intercept would miss, and the opportunity would be lost forever. The Lightnings took off at dawn, engines roaring through the humid air, their wings loaded with fuel tanks that would barely carry them home again. They flew at treetop level, skimming the ocean surface to remain invisible to Japanese radar operators watching from islands along the route. Every minute of the flight carried tension that could be felt through the vibration of the control sticks and the pounding of every pilot's heart. The formation approached Bougainville at precisely the calculated moment, guided only by faith in their instruments and the invisible mathematics of war. Then, as they climbed over the dense jungle coast, a lookout spotted a formation approaching from the north, exactly as intelligence had predicted. The Americans broke formation and rose through the tropical haze like ghosts, rising from the ocean, the sunlight glinting on their twin tails. Above them, 2 Japanese G4M bombers escorted by 6 Zeros cruised calmly, unaware that death was racing upward from below the clouds. The intercept unfolded in seconds. The Lightning formation split into groups, one to engage the escorts and another to strike directly at the target bombers. Major Mitchell ordered the attack with a single sharp command, and the sky erupted in thunder as engines roared and guns flared. Lieutenant Rex Barber closed in on the lead bomber, his P-38 screaming through the air at over 400 miles per hour. Through the gun sight, he saw the silver belly of the Betty bomber glinting in the morning sun as he lined up for a perfect attack run. He fired a long burst from his nose-mounted gun shells, tearing through the engines and fuselage of the enemy aircraft in a shower of flame. The bomber lurched violently and began trailing black smoke spinning downward toward the jungle canopy as the escort scattered in panic. Seconds later, another Lightning struck the second bomber, setting it ablaze before it could even attempt to evade or turn back toward safety. Both Japanese bombers fell from the sky like dying comets, their engines silent, their mission over before it even began. On board the lead aircraft, Admiral Yamamoto sat strapped into his seat, his hand still gripping a ceremonial sword given to him by the Emperor. He died instantly when the P-38's cannon shells ripped through the cockpit, tearing apart the symbol of Japan's naval supremacy in a single moment. The wreckage scattered across the Bougainville jungle and came to rest among the trees, silent witnesses to a turning point in the Pacific War. The intercept had lasted barely 3 minutes, but its consequences would echo across the world for decades. The Lightnings regrouped and turned for home, their fuel running dangerously low after more than 6 hours of continuous flight. They returned to Guadalcanal in silence, their victory known only to a handful of commanders who understood what had truly been accomplished. When news of Yamamoto's death reached Washington, President Roosevelt approved an official confirmation, only after ensuring Japanese intelligence believed it was coincidence. But the truth was clear. Operation Vengeance had succeeded in executing one of the most precise and daring aerial assassinations in military history. The Japanese government concealed Yamamoto's death for days before finally admitting the loss to their people through a somber announcement on national radio. Across Japan, citizens wept as the empire mourned the man who had once promised to bring America to its knees through swift and decisive war. For Japanese pilots, Yamamoto's death was a spiritual wound deeper than any battlefield defeat. It symbolized the fading of an unbreakable belief in destiny. In the following weeks, morale among air units collapsed as rumors spread that even the most powerful could not escape American reach. For the pilots of the P-38, the mission became a legend, whispered in every ready room as proof of their aircraft's unmatched range, precision, and power. Major Mitchell and his men received the Distinguished Service Cross, yet most spoke little about the mission, preferring silence to celebration. They had not killed a man, they had executed history itself, and such deeds leave scars even on victors. American newspapers eventually printed headlines celebrating the vengeance for Pearl Harbor, but the pilots who carried it out remained quiet professionals. To them, it was never revenge, it was necessity, the cold arithmetic of war demanding the removal of an enemy mind that had caused unimaginable suffering. For Japan, however, Yamamoto's loss was more than a military blow. It was a shattering of faith in the divine guidance of their empire. He had been both strategist and philosopher, the one who warned his leaders never to underestimate American industrial strength or fighting spirit. His death proved his warning true, and Japan now faced a war it could no longer win by courage alone. In the months that followed, the Lightning continued to dominate Pacific skies, escorting bombers across immense distances where no other fighter could reach. The mission's success validated the doctrine of precision interception, proving that technology could now replace luck and intuition in aerial warfare. Pilots across the world studied the mission as a masterpiece of coordination, timing, and engineering excellence unmatched in the history of aviation. Even Japanese historians later acknowledged the tactical brilliance of the operation, calling it a perfect storm of intelligence, planning, and execution. The Lightning had struck not only a man, but an empire's illusion of invulnerability, and that impact would ripple through every corner of the war. Yet behind every victory lies human cost, and those who returned from that mission carried the weight of what they had done for the rest of their lives. Some saw the wreckage of Yamamoto's bomber, later retrieved from Bougainville, twisted and silent amid the jungle vines, a monument to inevitable change. For others, it was the moment the war's balance tipped irreversibly in favor of the Allies, sealing Japan's fate beneath the thunder of advancing technology. The Japanese high command vowed revenge, but the empire's reach was shrinking, and its air power could no longer challenge the growing might of the Lightning squadrons. From the moment Yamamoto's plane fell, the Pacific skies truly belonged to America, and the spirit of the old warrior age was gone. Operation Vengeance became more than a mission. It was a prophecy of the future of warfare, a future ruled by machines and information. No longer would battles be decided by bravery alone, but by calculation and control of the invisible signals that guided weapons to their targets. The Lightning had shown that victory required not only courage, but mathematics, engineering, and intelligence working as one unstoppable force. It had proven that the nation which could decode enemy plans and reach across oceans with precision would rule the modern battlefield. For Japan, this realization came too late, as every battle that followed revealed the widening technological abyss between their shrinking forces and America's growing industrial empire. Yet among Japanese pilots, whispers of respect remained. They called the Lightning the two-tailed devil, and feared its shadow more than any other aircraft. Some swore they could hear its engines before they saw it, a haunting mechanical roar that echoed like thunder before death. And in that fear, they understood the true meaning of progress in war, that technology once born could never be reversed. The jungle where Yamamoto fell still holds fragments of his aircraft, twisted metal, rusted guns, and the silent memory of ambition meeting destiny. Local villagers later built a small shrine near the crash site, honoring not a commander or an enemy, but a man caught in history's tide. Even decades later, veterans from both sides would visit the site, leaving offerings and prayers for peace between those who once fought beneath the same sky. The Lightning's pilots grew old, but their mission remained eternal, etched into textbooks and documentaries as the ultimate example of precision warfare. Operation Vengeance changed how nations planned air campaigns, proving that information was now the most lethal weapon of all. It was not simply about killing an admiral. It was about destroying the idea that anyone could hide from the reach of modern power. The Lightning had become a symbol of calculated retribution, a machine capable of bending distance and destiny to human will. From that day forward, every pilot who climbed into a cockpit carried a piece of that lesson carved deep within his heart. War was no longer a contest of equals. It had become a struggle between those who mastered technology and those who worshipped tradition. In that struggle, the Lightning had already won, proving that the sky now belonged to science, not spirit. As the Pacific War raged on, the mission of Operation Vengeance stood as a beacon to every Allied airman who dared the impossible. It told them that no enemy was untouchable, no leader untouchable, and no distance too great when knowledge and courage worked together. And in the dying light of every sunset over the Pacific, the twin contrails of the P-38 still lingered like ghosts of thunder. The empire that once dreamed of eternal victory now faced the cold dawn of reality as its brightest star had fallen from the sky. Operation Vengeance had ended one life, but in doing so it marked the birth of modern warfare and the final end of Japanese air dominance. For the men who flew that day, their engines faded into history, yet their story remains carved forever in the clouds above Bougainville. The lightning had struck with divine precision, and the echo of that strike still trembles across the pages of time. For those who witnessed it, the mission proved a truth greater than victory, that power without understanding is fleeting, but innovation endures forever. And as the war continued to burn across the Pacific, every pilot knew the world had changed and would never be the same again. For some the mission was justice, for others it was vengeance, but for history, it was the moment man learned to kill with mathematics. The jungle swallowed the wreck, but the legend of the lightning lived on, soaring through history like a storm that never truly ends. Because for some men, the war does not fade with silence, it simply changes shape and continues in memory forever. The year was 1943, and the skies over the Solomon Islands had become the battleground of wills between the Empire of Japan and the rising air power of the United States. The P-38 Lightning now carved white streaks through the Pacific sky, and every Japanese pilot who once believed in Zero superiority felt a shadow pressing down on his spirit. American squadrons learned that victory in the air was no longer about elegant turns or graceful loops, but about speed, altitude, and precision guided by cold, calculated strategy. The twin booms of the P-38 were like claws stretching across the heavens, grasping for enemies who had once owned the daylight skies above the vast ocean. When the Lockheed engineers first imagined a plane that could climb like a falcon and dive like a falling star, they unknowingly reshaped the destiny of aerial warfare forever. The Pacific heat shimmered across the airstrips as crews prepared the Lightnings, their engines growling like wild beasts hungry for battle above the Emerald Islands below. The turbo-supercharged Allison engines were the heart of this machine, pumping power through the thin air at heights where Japanese aircraft gasped for breath and lost control. The Americans called it the boom and zoom technique, but to the Japanese it was an invisible death descending from heaven with thunder before they could even react. The tactics were brutally simple: climb high, dive fast, strike hard, and vanish into the clouds, leaving enemy pilots disoriented, shocked, and terrified by unseen opponents. Pilots like Thomas McGuire and Charles Lindbergh, who later tested the aircraft, discovered its unmatched endurance, enabling flights across hundreds of miles without refueling or losing performance. The Lightnings turned airfields like Henderson Field on Guadalcanal into launchpads of destruction, where every takeoff promised another strike at the heart of Japanese expansion. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai remembered hearing the shriek of diving P-38s and realizing his own aircraft could neither climb fast enough nor survive a head-on engagement. The fear spread among the Zero squadrons like a virus, whispering that the Americans had created something unnatural, a plane that broke the very rules of aerial combat. In Tokyo, military strategists argued about how to counter this machine, but every solution fell apart when tested against the Lightning's raw altitude, speed, and firepower advantage. The twin-engine design, once mocked as heavy and clumsy, now proved unstoppable when the enemy discovered it could fly home even with one engine shattered by bullets. The psychological effect on Japanese pilots became catastrophic, because they could no longer dictate the terms of battle, nor rely on superior maneuverability to escape destruction. Every encounter became a race against time, where the Lightning's climb rate outpaced every Zero trying to flee toward the sun or dive into the sea for cover. The P-38's presence forced the Japanese command to alter escort tactics, reduce offensive raids, and defend instead of dominate, marking a silent turning point in the Pacific War. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, the Allies could strike back deep into enemy territory, with precision raids guided by navigators who trusted the Lightning's incredible range. On April 18, 1943, the mission that would change history forever was approved. Operation Vengeance, the planned interception of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor. The intelligence came from decrypted Japanese codes revealing Yamamoto's inspection tour across the Solomon Islands, creating a rare chance for retribution cloaked in military necessity. 16 P-38. Lightnings were assigned the task, their flight path calculated with mathematical precision, crossing open ocean guided only by compass and courage, not radar or beacons. Major John W. Mitchell led the mission, knowing that a single mistake would expose them to enemy patrols, or leave them stranded hundreds of miles from friendly bases. At dawn, the engines roared across Guadalcanal, and the formation rose into the blue horizon, slicing through clouds like silver blades, bound for a destiny written in vengeance. Hours passed in tense silence as pilots stared into endless water, praying their calculations were right, that they would reach Bougainville at exactly the right moment in time. Then, as if summoned by fate, Yamamoto's escort of Zero fighters appeared below two Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, flying in precise formation, unaware of death approaching from above. The P-38s descended like hawks. Mitchell signaled the attack, and the silence of the Pacific shattered under the roar of synchronized machine gun fire cutting through the sky. One Lightning dived straight at Yamamoto's bomber, riddling it with rounds until smoke poured from its engines, and it fell burning into the jungle canopy below. The admiral who had orchestrated Pearl Harbor now met his end, not on a ship or in a command post, but amid the wreckage of his own ambitions. The second bomber attempted to escape, but was hunted down relentlessly, its wings torn apart by the concentrated firepower that left nothing but twisted metal, drifting toward the sea. The P-38s turned home victorious but silent, because they knew the world would never fully understand the precision and cost of what they had just achieved. Operation Vengeance became more than a mission. It became a symbol of calculated justice, the merging of intelligence, engineering, and courage in perfect, deadly harmony. The news reached Washington weeks later, and the mood shifted because the myth of Japanese invincibility in the air had been shattered beyond repair by American innovation. For the pilots who flew that day, the memory remained burned into their souls because they had faced impossible odds with nothing but faith in their aircraft and each other. Engineers back home studied combat data to refine every Lightning built, improving climb rates and reducing drag, making future versions even deadlier than the first ones deployed. Factories in California worked around the clock, churning out P-38s faster than Japan could replace its losses, demonstrating how industrial strength now dictated the fate of nations. In the Pacific, the Japanese began to withdraw their elite airmen, conserving what remained of their squadrons against an enemy who no longer played by traditional rules. The battlefield skies that once echoed with the chants of rising sun warriors now carried the thunder of American engines and the metallic heartbeat of industrial dominance. Every island captured, every convoy sunk, and every air raid launched now bore the mark of Lightning pilots who had rewritten the art of aerial warfare forever. The Lightning had proven that speed, altitude, and firepower could break even the most disciplined spirit, because courage alone could not overcome technological evolution. American pilots gained confidence flying deeper into enemy territory, destroying supply lines, communication hubs, and shipping routes that once sustained the Japanese Empire's vast oceanic reach. In every debriefing, officers noted that the Japanese morale had collapsed not only from losses, but from the realization that they were now prey instead of predators. The once proud Zero aces found themselves running defensive sorties, trapped by radar screens, and intercepted before they could even form attack formations over their own airfields. The Pacific theater had turned from a battlefield of skill into a contest of endurance, where production numbers and mechanical superiority decided who lived and who burned. The Lightning dominated high-altitude interceptions, striking reconnaissance planes and bombers that previously roamed free, leaving the Japanese blind across wide stretches of oceanic war zones. The balance of power shifted rapidly, because the Americans now owned the sky, and control of the sky meant control of the islands below and the sea beyond. By late 1943, the P-38 was no longer just an aircraft, it was a legend, a psychological weapon that whispered doom to every pilot who saw its silhouette. The tactical manuals of both sides rewrote themselves, acknowledging that aerial combat had evolved into something beyond chivalry or duels. Now it was science and speed. Pilots, once trained in turning battles, now learned energy fighting using altitude as ammunition and time as a weapon, taught by the lessons the Lightning carved in air. For every Zero that fell, a message spread through the Pacific sky. The Empire had reached the edge of its technological limits, and the future belonged to innovation. From Guadalcanal to Bougainville, from New Guinea to Rabaul, the Lightning became the herald of American air supremacy, paving the path for bombers and liberators yet to come. Japanese observers who once believed in spiritual superiority began to question everything they were taught, realizing that machines powered by science had outmatched devotion alone. The Lightning pilots returned to their bases drenched in sweat and silence, haunted by the faces of men they had never seen, but knew they had defeated. At night, they gathered in small tents, staring at stars that seemed closer now, perhaps because they had touched them, while fighting for their lives above the clouds. Each mission brought them closer to victory, yet further from innocence, because with every triumph they learned that mastery of the sky demanded the surrender of humanity. The war was still far from over, but something irreversible had begun, because now America understood that technology could conquer even the most fanatical enemies. The Japanese realized too late that faith could not outfly machinery built by engineers who turned mathematics into weapons and dreams into engines of destruction. The Lightning AS twin tails became symbols of hope for some and omens of doom for others as they streaked across the endless blue horizon of the Pacific. The American pilots who flew these machines felt both pride and fear, because every flight could end in fire, yet every victory brought them closer to ending the nightmare. Their commanders understood that the war had entered a new dimension, a technological arms race, where progress itself became the most powerful weapon of all. In training films and debriefings, officers quoted lessons from Lightning missions, turning real battles into textbooks for future generations of pilots to study and perfect. Even Japanese tacticians who survived began sketching new aircraft designs inspired by the P-38's power, though their factories could no longer keep pace with the industrial avalanche. By 1944, American carriers advanced deeper and faster, supported by Lightning escorts that extended their reach across thousands of miles, ensuring no enemy aircraft could strike unchallenged. The Pacific became a graveyard of Zero wreckage scattered across jungles, beaches, and oceans, each twisted frame a monument to the changing age of warfare. For every pilot who once swore by the sword, the sky now demanded circuits and turbines, for the battlefield had evolved beyond the reach of old traditions. When the Lightnings returned from each sortie ground, crews counted bullet holes, patched armor, and silent nods of gratitude for machines that refused to die, even when wounded. Engineers in America received field reports refining design flaws, ensuring each new Lightning was faster, tougher, and more capable of delivering death without hesitation or mercy. The collaboration between pilots and engineers became a silent alliance, bridging science and courage, merging metal and will into a force that no empire could withstand. In the mess halls, stories spread of Yamamoto's fall, and how the Lightning pilots had avenged the ghosts of Pearl Harbor with mathematical precision and steel resolve. The myth of the unbeatable Zero had died over Bougainville that morning, replaced by a new legend forged in aluminum rivets and turbocharged thunder. The Empire of Japan would never recover its air superiority again, because the Lightning had rewritten the rules of war in smoke contrails and shattered illusions. Every Japanese commander who watched the skies after 1943 knew the sound of twin engines meant the inevitable loss of men planes and hope. The Lightning was more than a machine. It was a prophecy that foresaw the coming of jet-age warfare, where no amount of bravery could outrun progress. As the war dragged on, the pilots who mastered it carried the burden of knowing they had witnessed the dawn of a new kind of destruction. Their victories were necessary, yet haunting, because behind every explosion lay the truth that humanity had unlocked the sky but chained its conscience. The Pacific burned with the light of innovation and the roar of engines built not only to win wars, but to redefine what survival meant. The P-38 Lightning had become the storm that ended an empire, its thunder echoing across islands that once believed themselves protected by the rising sun. By the end of 1943, the Japanese High Command realized the war was slipping beyond recovery, though pride forced them to fight even as hope vanished into clouds. The Lightning had done what no single weapon could before it had broken the will of an enemy not through fear, but through inevitability. And as the Americans looked toward new battles, they carried one truth forward: that superiority in the air was now the key to victory on Earth. The Pacific War would continue, but the tide had turned forever, shaped by wings of silver light that conquered both sky and spirit in equal measure. For those who fought within the cockpit of the P-38, every mission was a step closer to ending the darkness that once swallowed the Pacific whole. Their courage met technology, and together they became unstoppable, the living embodiment of an age where invention became destiny, and destiny demanded sacrifice. Above the endless blue, the twin booms of the Lightning traced history itself burning across the heavens, as a reminder that progress always comes with a cost. The Empire AS skies had fallen silent, but the echoes of that thunder would linger for generations, because in those clouds, humanity had crossed the threshold of a new era. The war in the Pacific was entering its final and most destructive stage as the echoes of the Lightning's victories continued to reshape the skies above a burning empire. The P-38 Lightning had proven its worth beyond question, transforming air strategy from desperate defense to overwhelming dominance and ensuring that America's industrial power now dictated the future of war. The Japanese Air Force that once soared with pride now crawled beneath the clouds, unable to challenge the supremacy of twin engines that ruled the heavens with thunder and precision. Every remaining Zero that rose into the air did so knowing that its chances of returning were vanishingly small, as the Lightning's shadow darkened every mission. From Guadalcanal to New Guinea, from Rabaul to the Marianas, the P-38 carried victory across the Pacific, stretching American control over thousands of miles of ocean and enemy fear. For the pilots who flew those missions, the glory was mixed with exhaustion, because every victory carried the weight of comrades lost and the haunting silence of the men they replaced. Richard Bong, the quiet Midwestern pilot who became America's top ace, would score 40 aerial victories, but behind his smile hid the toll of endless battles and unseen scars. He flew his Lightning with unmatched precision, believing in its power, yet aware that each dogfight erased a part of his humanity that could never be reclaimed. The men who survived these encounters returned home changed by fire because the sky had taught them that death was not an enemy, but a constant companion. They no longer feared the Zero or the enemy, they feared the quiet after combat, the silence where the thunder once lived in their ears and minds. The Lightning became a symbol of America's rise, the embodiment of how intellect and industry could overcome tradition and spirit in a conflict where progress itself was the ultimate weapon. Factories that once built cars and farm machinery now rolled out wings of polished aluminum, while thousands of hands turned raw metal into the future of warfare. The power of production had defeated the philosophy of sacrifice, proving that numbers, engines, and innovation could accomplish what courage alone could not sustain. In Japan, the remaining aces wrote farewell letters to families knowing they could not match the enemy's technology, and that honor alone would not save their homeland from destruction. The Empire's skies were filled with smoke and despair, as cities burned beneath waves of bombers escorted by Lightnings that now served as guardians of devastation. The Americans had mastered long-range escort missions, and the P-38 became their shield, carrying bombers deep into the heart of the enemy's remaining defenses. Every mission was a statement that the age of individual heroes was fading, replaced by coordinated machines of war, driven by science rather than legend. The Lightning's design influenced new generations of fighters, shaping the blueprints of the jet age, where speed and altitude would reign supreme over agility and instinct. Engineers studied its performance data to develop the P-80 Shooting Star, the first operational American jet that would soon carry forward the legacy of speed into a new era. The war had turned into a lesson about adaptation and resilience, because those who failed to innovate were destined to fade into history, set forgotten corners. In mess tents and airfields across the Pacific, pilots discussed not just victories but the meaning of survival in a conflict that consumed souls as easily as steel. Many found comfort in the mechanics who kept their planes alive, understanding that victory was built not only in the sky but also in the sweat of unseen hands. The Lightning had united engineers and warriors into one machine of purpose, where intellect and instinct worked together against an enemy bound by outdated codes of honor. As the months passed, American forces advanced across the islands, supported by the Lightning's reconnaissance missions that mapped defenses and located convoys hidden beneath jungle canopies. These missions were more dangerous than combat, because a single mechanical failure meant drifting into enemy waters alone, with nothing but the endless ocean below. Yet the pilots flew without hesitation, believing that the information they carried would save lives and shorten the nightmare for countless soldiers fighting below. The Empire's war effort was collapsing under pressure as resources dwindled and morale vanished, and even the most devoted commanders admitted that the tide could no longer be reversed. The P-38 had become both the spear and the shield of America's air power, leading assaults and protecting bombers with precision that broke the enemy's remaining resistance. The skies over Japan, once filled with Zero formations, now echoed only with the distant hum of American engines closing in with unstoppable inevitability. The Lightning's victory was not celebrated with cheers, but with quiet understanding that dominance had come at a terrible cost, paid in youth and innocence. For every pilot who returned, another did not, and the balance of progress was measured not in trophies, but in names etched into memorials across the Pacific. Technicians examined wrecked Japanese planes, discovering how outdated their technology had become, and realizing that faith in tradition could never outrun the pace of innovation. The Japanese command had gambled everything on spirit, but the war proved that machines built on science could break even the strongest will through precision and persistence. The Lightning's legacy stretched beyond combat, becoming a lesson for future generations that courage needed direction and strength required intellect to achieve lasting victory. The men who flew the P-38 would return home to a country that hailed them as heroes, yet few could explain the nightmares that followed long after the war ended. They had witnessed the transformation of air combat from bravery to technology, from duels of honor to orchestrated strikes that resembled machines more than men. The world had crossed a threshold, and the Lightning stood as the symbol of that transition, where humanity learned to master the sky but risked losing its soul. Even Japanese survivors admitted that facing the Lightning felt like fighting the future itself, a glimpse of power they could neither match nor understand. The empire that once rose with divine wind now fell beneath the storm of turbines, propellers, and steel wings crafted in American factories thousands of miles away. The war ended not with a single battle, but with the relentless pressure of progress that left no room for those who refused to evolve. As the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the lessons of the P-38 became clear: that domination of the air meant domination of the world. The Lightning had shown that control of the sky was the final step toward total control of the battlefield, transforming war into a contest of innovation. Historians would later call it the beginning of the modern era of warfare, where machines became extensions of human ambition and fear, intertwined with precision. The P-38's engineers could not have imagined that their creation would become a blueprint for generations of fighters, defining how nations would wage war for decades to come. Its twin-boom design inspired aircraft around the world, proving that unconventional ideas could succeed when guided by determination and the pursuit of perfection. Pilots who once battled the Lightning later studied it in peacetime, acknowledging that it had set the foundation for global air power and aerial strategy. The Pacific veterans who flew Lightnings carried the memory of the islands within them, every wave, every cloud, every flash of tracer fire etched into their minds. They had lived through the transformation of warfare and watched as the machines they trusted became relics, replaced by faster, stronger jets they could barely recognize. Yet the Lightning remained a legend, not just for its victories, but for what it represented: the unyielding belief that innovation could change the fate of nations. The P-38's legacy continued in every jet fighter, every radar system, and every pilot trained under doctrines shaped by lessons learned in those burning Pacific skies. Military academies around the world studied the Lightning's performance, analyzing its tactics to teach new generations how to fight not with fear, but with knowledge and adaptation. The Japanese archives recorded their own reflections, noting how the Empire's devotion to spiritual strength blinded them to the mechanical revolution unfolding across the Pacific. They wrote that the Lightning was not merely an enemy aircraft, but a mirror showing what Japan could have become had it embraced change instead of resisting it. American veterans spoke of the Lightning with reverence, calling it both a savior and a burden, because it carried them through victory and left them haunted by survival. In post-war air shows, the polished P-38s gleamed under the sun as symbols of courage, intellect, and the relentless march of human progress through destruction. The aircraft became part of national memory, a reminder of how ingenuity could defend freedom, and how war demanded both brilliance and sacrifice in equal measure. The world entered a new era where nations raced to build faster aircraft, and the Lightning stood at the crossroads between propeller and jet, symbolizing transition. The men who once battled the Japanese skies aged quietly, carrying the invisible weight of knowing they had flown the storm that changed everything. They understood that every revolution in technology carried both triumph and tragedy, that progress was a weapon capable of saving or destroying depending on who wielded it. The Lightning taught that mastery of science was essential, but wisdom was required to ensure that innovation served humanity instead of consuming it. Long after the war ended, museums across the world displayed the P-38 not as an instrument of death, but as a monument to invention and perseverance. Visitors would stare at its sleek frame, unaware that beneath its polished metal lay the echoes of countless lives entwined with its history of fire and sky. For some veterans, the Lightning represented freedom, the power to fight back against tyranny. For others, it symbolized loss, the price of victory paid in silence. Its story transcended generations, inspiring engineers, soldiers, and dreamers who saw in its design the perfect union between imagination and necessity forged in the crucible of war. The empire that once ruled by the sword learned that the pen and the circuit, the lathe and the blueprint were the new tools of dominance. The world had changed irrevocably, and the Lightning's roar marked the sound of that transformation, echoing from the Pacific into every sky mankind would ever conquer. Historians still debate whether the Lightning was the most important aircraft of the war, but few deny that it redefined what flight and victory truly meant. It was a weapon born from desperation, yet refined by vision, a testament to how creativity could emerge, even amid the darkest storms of human conflict. Every flight it made was both a triumph of engineering and a reminder that progress often comes hand in hand with destruction and sorrow. The P-38's legacy endured because it was more than an aircraft. It was a story of courage, innovation, and the human hunger to rise above limits. As peace settled over the Pacific, the veterans looked back and wondered if the price of progress had been worth the blood spilled across the endless waves. They knew that the Lightning had changed everything from tactics to doctrine, from fear to dominance, and that its thunder had rewritten the laws of aerial war. Its story became a lesson for the ages that in war, the strongest weapon is not the machine itself, but the mind that dares to imagine it. The Lightning's engineers had dreamed of a plane that could reach the stars, and in doing so, they had also reached into the soul of humanity. The Pacific veterans carried that dream home, building a new world from the ashes, one powered by knowledge instead of faith in outdated ideals. Their children would inherit the skies as pilots of a new age, born from the lessons learned in the firestorms above the islands of the Pacific. The Lightning had proven that innovation was the true measure of survival, that nations willing to evolve would always outlast those clinging to ancient pride. It had shown that technology guided by purpose could preserve freedom, but technology without wisdom could consume the world it sought to protect. The empire had fallen, the world had changed, and the Lightning's wings still stretched across history, carrying the weight of both victory and warning. As the last Lightnings were retired, their echoes remained in the engines of modern jets and the hearts of all who believed in the power of progress. The war had ended, but the lessons it taught would live forever, engraved in every innovation, every cockpit, and every generation that looked to the sky. For the men who built and flew the P-38, the sky would never again be just blue. It would always be filled with memory and meaning. They had flown through thunder and fire, and emerged to tell the world that courage alone was not enough. Only knowledge could secure peace. The Lightning had revolutionized aerial warfare, and in doing so had changed the course of history, marking the dawn of a new technological civilization. And in the quiet after victory, they understood the truth that for some, the war never truly ended. It just changed shape, carried onward in progress and memory.